December 16, 1944. In the pre-dawn darkness near Mona, Germany, the frozen ground shuddered not just in the cold, but from the relentless rhythm of American artillery fire. Yet, on this specific morning, the barrage carried a terrifying, incomprehensible difference. The incoming shells were not impacting the earth or splintering the dense forest canopy. Instead, they were detonating with synchronized precision high above the advancing German lines, unleashing a catastrophic, lethal downpour of steel shrapnel that rendered traditional foxholes and entrenchments utterly useless. For the veterans of the 326th Volk Grenadier Division, tasked with assaulting the positions held by the 38th Cavalry Squadron, this was a form of combat that defied their hard-won knowledge of the Eastern Front. They were accustomed to predictable artillery patterns, known safe zones, and the protective value of deep cover. This new reality was death delivered with unprecedented, mathematical precision from the skies. At that very moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had initiated one of the most consequential and entirely unauthorized tactical decisions of the entire Battle of the Bulge. Disregarding strict standing orders and acting without permission from higher command, Axelson commanded his gun crews to load shells equipped with the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal, the proximity fuse. These sophisticated devices, containing miniature radar systems, could automatically calculate their distance from the target and initiate detonation at the optimal altitude. This technological leap multiplied the effective lethality of Allied artillery by a factor exceeding 50. The very mathematics of battlefield destruction were being instantaneously rewritten in the frigid forests of the Ardennes. The German soldiers could not have known that they had just encountered a weapon so revolutionary, a fusion of science and firepower, that would transform not only the outcome of this pivotal battle, but the fundamental nature of modern warfare itself. The storm had been irrevocably unleashed. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's final desperate gamble, had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht. The offensive, a desperate and final gamble by the Führer, mobilized a formidable mechanized force. 200,000 German soldiers, supported by 1,000 tanks and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces. This immense military apparatus was meticulously concealed within the dense, fog-shrouded forests of the Ardennes, ensuring complete tactical surprise. Adolf Hitler had personally assured his high command that this decisive push would irrevocably split the Allied armies and culminate in the recapture of the crucial port of Antwerp, thereby reversing the trajectory of a war that was inexorably sliding toward defeat. At precisely 0530 hours on December 16th, the operation began with an overwhelming initial bombardment. German artillery achieved complete surprise, unleashing fire at a staggering rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85-mile front. This success was rooted in a catastrophic failure of American intelligence, which had not detected the massive enemy buildup. Consequently, many frontline units consisted either of unseasoned green replacements or exhausted veterans placed in the supposedly quiet sector for necessary rest. Near Monshaw, Colonel Axelson and the 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, faced an impossible tactical situation, rapidly being overwhelmed by superior German forces. Conventional defensive artillery proved incapable of halting the relentless assault. In a moment of profound desperation, Axelson made his historic decision to deploy the highly classified proximity fuse shells without explicit authorization. He recognized that adhering strictly to protocol meant certain annihilation, a choice for which he would later face a potential court-martial. The impact was immediate and devastating. German soldiers advancing in traditional dense assault formations suddenly found themselves under a type of aerial fire entirely new to them. The shells detonated 30 to 50 feet above the ground, each burst projecting a deadly cone of fragmentation that covered an exponentially greater area than standard ground burst munitions. Veterans skilled at seeking cover from normal artillery fire, in foxholes, behind trees, or within ditches, were ruthlessly cut down. The secret science of death, the proximity fuse, represented the lethal convergence of American technological prowess. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. Unlike traditional artillery shells, which relied on inaccurate time fuses or direct impact for detonation, the VT fuse introduced a revolutionary concept, a self-contained radar system housed within the projectile. This tiny device, often no larger than a coffee can, contained 130 intricate electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes. These components had to endure the staggering physics of launch, an acceleration force reaching 20,000 times gravity, 20,000 g, upon being fired from an artillery piece. The power source itself was ingenious. The extreme acceleration crushed a fragile glass ampoule holding electrolyte, instantly creating a battery to power the tiny radar during flight. This intense development was spearheaded by Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, an effort demanding Manhattan Project-level intensity. The APL, operating secretly from a facility disguised as a used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, eventually employed nearly 3% of all American physicists during its peak production phase. Security protocols mirrored those governing the atomic bomb program. Workers were forbidden from discussing their work, and every fuse carried a unique serial number for stringent tracking. The technical hurdles appeared insurmountable. Existing vacuum tubes, designed for static living room radios, had to be fundamentally redesigned to survive cannon launch, function reliably at extreme rotational speeds, operate consistently in all weather, and yet remain sensitive enough to detect targets without premature detonation. The ultimate breakthrough lay in radical miniaturization techniques, developments that would later revolutionize the modern electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen successfully engineered tubes no larger than a pencil eraser, yet containing all the elements of their conventional predecessors. By December 1944, American factories had achieved a monumental output, manufacturing 40,000 proximity fuses every day. The development of this advanced ordnance was a monumental industrial undertaking, drawing upon the expertise of American corporate giants from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and the Crossley Corporation. The program scope was reflected in its staggering financial commitment, reaching $1 billion in 1940s dollars, a figure second only to the clandestine Manhattan Project in total wartime expenditure. Yet, the weapons combat deployment was initiated by a profound command crisis. On December 16th, Major General Axelson executed an unauthorized action, violating direct orders that restricted proximity fuses solely to anti-aircraft use. This limitation had been established out of the critical fear that captured examples might be swiftly reverse-engineered by German technicians. But the devastating effectiveness demonstrated at Mona proved undeniable. The German assault was stopped cold, resulting in casualties that sent shockwaves through both Allied and Axis high commands. Word of the weapon's impact quickly reached Supreme Headquarters. Recognizing the desperate strategic situation developing across the Ardennes, General Eisenhower formally requested full authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all previous restrictions were officially lifted, freeing proximity fuses for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The rapid distribution that immediately followed served as a powerful testament to American logistical superiority. Within days, these revolutionary shells were being delivered to artillery units throughout the Ardennes sector. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion received their critical allocation precisely as the German ring closed around Bastogne. Similarly, the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, utilizing their M7 pre-self-propelled howitzers, began employing them to defend the crucial northwest approaches. Notably, the 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed the fuses with devastating effects southwest of Bastogne. Across all commands, the same truth was swiftly discovered. The proximity fuse had fundamentally transformed artillery from a conventional support asset into a decisive battlefield tool, eliminating the need for time-consuming forward observer adjustments. The proximity fuses fundamentally shifted artillery combat, allowing shells to find their own optimal detonation point above the target. This innovation exponentially increased lethality by creating shrapnel airbursts, effectively decreasing the reliance on pinpoint accuracy. The desperate siege of Bastogne, with a surrounded yet superior 101st Airborne Division held a vital crossroads against overwhelming German forces, became the definitive testing ground for these new weapons in defensive warfare. Crucial to this defense was the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers capable of firing proximity-fuse ammunition. Official unit records confirm that between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd expended exactly 7,676 rounds. While supply limitations meant not all were fused, those that were delivered a terrifying psychological and physical toll. German assault formations, caught in the open, simply dissolved under the overlapping patterns of destruction, with entire platoons eliminated instantaneously by the airburst barrages. The devastating effectiveness of this technology was starkly demonstrated during the December 22nd attack. Immediately following General McCullough's famous Nuts reply to the surrender demand, German infantry advancing across the snow-covered fields in traditional columns were caught completely exposed. The shells detonated overhead with precise, engineered timing, leaving no safe zones. Equally vital was the all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion. Utilizing their heavier 155mm howitzers, they established an impenetrable ring of death around Bastion's perimeter. These larger shells, detonating at 50 feet, covered even greater areas with lethal fragments. Later, German prisoners reported that attacking units often lost all tactical cohesion, with soldiers fleeing in panic from the incomprehensible, unseen airbursts long before reaching American lines. This unprecedented artillery superiority set the stage for later engagements, including the grim reality of the Sour River slaughter. The most chilling and thoroughly documented proof of the proximity fuse's devastating lethality unfolded on Christmas night, December 25th to 26th, at the Sour River near Ecton. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was relentlessly pushing north to relieve Bastogne, observed this horrific engagement firsthand, later recording the details in his memoir, War as I Knew It. Concealed by the dense fog and the deep winter darkness, a German battalion attempted a perilous crossing of the partially frozen river, believing themselves shielded from American spotters. Under normal circumstances, traditional artillery required time-consuming adjustments and ranging shots, offering the enemy crucial minutes to find cover or complete their maneuver. The proximity fuse eliminated this grace period entirely. Patton's own account is stark. We caught a German battalion crossing the Sour. The new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. The precise figure, 702 killed by actual count, remains one of the war's few exact casualty tallies tied directly to proximity fuse deployment. The mathematical efficiency of the technology was absolute. A full battalion was annihilated in minutes, granted no possibility of defense or retreat. The resulting psychological terror quickly metastasized through the German lines, with reports emerging of soldiers outright refusing orders to attempt further river crossings. Furthermore, the very nature of forest warfare transformed. The dense, concealing woods of the Ardennes, which the German forces relied upon for protection, instantly became lethal traps. While an air burst detonating at the standard 30 to 50 feet was deadly in open fields, the effect multiplied exponentially within the tree line. The explosive force shattered the heavy branches, converting them into thousands of secondary wooden projectiles. These deadly splinters, some the length of a man's arm, traveled at immense velocities. The lethal fragmentation, traveling at hundreds of feet per second, rendered traditional defensive positions instantly obsolete. Centuries of tactical wisdom concerning forest fighting were negated almost overnight. Taking cover behind large trees or digging rudimentary foxholes under root systems became useless actions when the deadly fragments and splinters now descended unerringly from above. American artillery units swiftly recognized the devastating multiplier effect inherent in this new technology. A single proximity fuse 155mm shell, engineered to detonate precisely above the forest canopy, possessed the destructive power to clear an area the size of a tennis court of all living things. The combination of high-velocity metal fragments from the shell casing and jagged wooden splinters ripped from surrounding trees created a terrifying, inescapable 360-degree kill zone that no measure of tactical skill could evade. German units, despite being highly trained in the intricacies of forest warfare, found their expertise utterly worthless. Spreading out to mitigate concentrated casualties only exposed units to the wide area effect of blasts, while bunching together for mutual support meant entire squads could be eliminated by a single shell. Faced with this technical supremacy in action, there was no correct tactical response to the new threat. At the heart of this revolution lay the proximity fuse, an innovation that must have appeared as science fiction to the 1940s soldier. Each tiny fuse housed a miniature radio transmitter broadcasting continuously at 180 to 220 megahertz. These radio waves reflected off any object, the ground, trees, vehicles, or human bodies. As the shell approached its intended target, the reflected signal rapidly strengthened. Upon reaching a predetermined intensity, corresponding precisely to the optimal burst height, an electronic switch instantly triggered the high explosive detonation. Crucially, this complex system had to maintain flawless functionality under conditions designed to destroy normal electronics. During the firing sequence, the acceleration imposed upon the fuse reached an astronomical 20,000 times the force of Earth's gravity, a pressure sufficient to crush a human body to microscopic thickness, all while the shell spun violently, generating massive centrifugal forces. The journey of the shell was one of extreme physics. Inside the casing, temperatures swung violently from the gun barrel, searing 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit heat to the frigid sub-zero conditions encountered at trajectory peak. Yet, the delicate vacuum tube, shielded by sophisticated, innovative cushioning systems, consistently survived this brutal transit, boasting an operational reliability exceeding 80%. Extensive testing at the Abedyne Proving Ground had meticulously determined the optimal burst heights for maximum lethality. The standard divisional 105 mm howitzer proved ideal at 30 feet, while the heavier 155 mm guns achieved maximum effect at 50 feet. The rare, massive 240 mm shells, detonating at 70 feet or more, possessed the devastating capability of clearing entire grid squares of enemy forces. This technological superiority immediately translated into undeniable battlefield dominance. Studies demonstrated that proximity fuses amplified conventional shell lethality by a factor of 5 to 10, increasing the lethal fragmentation area by an astonishing 50 times. The impact on anti-aircraft defense was even more dramatic. The success rate against the terrifying V-1 flying bomb soared from a dismal 17% to a highly effective 79% within weeks of deployment. This strategic advantage was compounded by catastrophic intelligence failure on the enemy side. When Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot in December 1944, they captured an intelligence windfall, approximately 20,000 proximity fuse shells. This discovery should have spurred immediate countermeasure development. Instead, German technical experts, blinded by institutional dogma, dismissed the captured technology as impossible. The notion of delicate vacuum tubes surviving the intense G-forces of artillery fire fundamentally contradicted everything German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. They concluded the visible components must be decoys or part of a complex magnetic detection system. The irony was profound. This intellectual failure stemmed partly from historical oversight, as Germany, specifically the firm Rheinmetall, had actually pioneered early proximity fuse development before the war. By 1940, the German industrial complex, spearheaded by Borsig and AEG Berlin, had already developed working prototypes for proximity fuses. Yet, this crucial technological advantage was abandoned when Hitler issued his fateful order terminating all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months to reach production status. German engineers found it almost unbelievable that the Americans had successfully solved the very problems they themselves had been forced to discard. The irony was deepened by the documented technical superiority of German designs. Their electrostatic proximity fuses had achieved a remarkable 95% reliability in testing, utilizing changes in electrical capacitance rather than the more complex radar systems. Had the development not been curtailed, Germany might well have fielded operational proximity fuses by 1941. Hermann Göring would later confirm during Allied interrogation that these German fuses were a mere 3 or 4 months from full production when the war finally concluded. This catastrophic strategic failure manifested starkly on the front lines during the so-called Christmas catastrophe. December 25, 1944, offered no holiday respite. German units attempting to exploit the day for resupply and reorganization quickly discovered that proximity fuses recognized no ceasefires. Field kitchens, vulnerable supply convoys, and exposed assembly areas came under a relentless, devastating bombardment that required no forward observers to guide the fire. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone expended over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, the overwhelming majority of which were proximity fused. Their M7 pre-self-propelled howitzers delivered a rapid, accurate barrage that caught German units completely unprepared. The ability to fire effectively without direct observation in poor weather or total darkness fundamentally transformed artillery from a daylight weapon into an omnipresent 24-hour threat. The psychological impact was profound. German soldiers had learned to rely on fog and darkness as a sanctuary, knowing Allied aircraft could not fly and observers could not spot them. The proximity fuse eliminated this refuge entirely. Death could now arrive at any moment, in any weather, with no warning beyond the brief whistle of incoming shells. This terror defined a desperate fight against SS Colonel Otto Skorzny's elite commandos, who, since December 21st, had attempted. The assault aimed at Malmedy was spearheaded by troops specifically selected for the most daring missions. The same elite commandos who had successfully rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Marshal Tito, and famously infiltrated American lines utilizing captured U.S. uniforms. They represented the zenith of German combat capability, yet they encountered a new, invisible enemy, devastating proximity-fused artillery fire. This technological innovation instantaneously transformed their American disguises from a tactical advantage into fatal shrouds. The shells detonated with uncanny, air-burst precision high above the ground, seemingly able to detect the imposters below. While the exact casualty figures remain contested, the attack failed catastrophically, inflicting such heavy losses that it effectively terminated Scorsese's offensive operations. Crucially, the psychological breakdown among these elite SS troops was profound. Indoctrinated with notions of German superiority and trained to the highest standards, they found themselves utterly helpless against American technological supremacy. Reports indicate that some survivors, seeking immediate cessation of the relentless bombardment, charged directly toward American positions, choosing a quick death over further exposure, a complete and telling collapse of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical forces. This devastating field performance was rooted in an industrial achievement that rivaled any manufacturing feat of the war. By December 1944, the American production effort had scaled dramatically, with over 100 companies converting their facilities for fuse assembly. Corporations like the Crosley Corporation abandoned consumer refrigerator manufacturing, while Emerson Radio retooled entirely from home electronics to complex weapon production. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric dedicated immense resources and entire facilities to this classified program. The demands for quality control exceeded anything previously attempted in mass production history. Every single one of the 130 microcomponents was subjected to individual testing. Technicians inspected every solder joint under magnification, and random samples were regularly fired under simulated combat conditions, ensuring their absolute reliability under the stress of battle. The manufacturing reality demanded absolute perfection. The rejection rate for any component showing the slightest deviation was ruthless. Working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, the workforce, predominantly women, maintained this extraordinary precision, unaware of the specific weapon they were assembling due to stringent security compartmentalization. They knew only that their efforts were vital to the Allied war effort. By December 1944, this industrialized effort yielded an astonishing production rate. One proximity fuse was rolling off the assembly line every 2 seconds, around the clock. The financial transformation achieved was equally remarkable. In 1942, each fuse cost an exorbitant $732, a sum that exceeded a worker's annual salary. Yet, by the end of 1944, mass production had driven the unit cost down to just $18, all while maintaining strict quality standards. This efficiency allowed for production of 22 million fuses throughout the war, with a critical 200,000 deployed during the crucible of the Battle of the Bulge alone. No commander better understood the revolutionary value of the proximity fuse than General George S. Patton, Jr. His Third Army, tasked with a swift drive to relieve Bastogne, wielded the fuse as a decisive breakthrough weapon. His brilliant artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed entirely new tactical doctrines specifically for its employment. Williams pioneered the devastating time-on-target concentration, wherein multiple artillery battalions fired shells timed so that they arrived and detonated simultaneously. When dozens of proximity fuse shells exploded at the optimal height above the tree line or trenches, the resulting air burst was apocalyptic. German soldiers, witnessing the synchronized aerial onslaught, grimly named it the bell toll of death. In the pivotal week between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army unleashed 50,000 proximity fuse shells. The concentrated fire proved decisive in shattering entrenched German resistance and forcibly opening the corridor toward Bastogne. Patton himself offered the definitive summary of its impact, writing, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." The subsequent defense of Elsenborn Ridge further demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum effectiveness, allowing the 2nd and 99th Divisions to hold their lines against overwhelming counterattacks. American infantry divisions desperately held critical terrain against the relentless spearhead of the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the formidable elite of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler. Over the pivotal 3 days, December 17th to 19th, American artillery unleashed a staggering 160,000 rounds. Crucially, approximately 40,000 of these were proximity fused. This technological advantage proved mathematically devastating. These 25% of shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. The proximity fuse had multiplied American firepower by a factor of 4. The German attacks, launched repeatedly up steep, frozen, forested slopes, were met not by ground impacts, but by impenetrable walls of air-burst steel. Entire companies vanished in moments, their bodies piling so thickly that subsequent assault waves were forced to climb over the corpses of their own dead. After 3 days of slaughter, the attacks ceased. The fighting spirit of the Waffen-SS elite had been fundamentally broken by American innovation. The technological reckoning continued into the new year. On January 1st, 1945, the desperate Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, sending nearly 900 fighters in a mass surprise attack against Allied airfields. While the initial surprise was complete, catching many Allied aircraft grounded, the returning German pilots soon encountered a lethal gauntlet. Dense screens of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. The resulting kill rate was astonishing. Of 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 fell specifically to anti-aircraft guns, the majority utilizing the new fuse technology. German pilots, trained rigorously to evade traditional predictive anti-aircraft fire, were helpless as shells detonated precisely where they would cause maximum structural damage. The already crippled Luftwaffe never recovered from these catastrophic losses. With such widespread deployment and overwhelming effectiveness, maintaining the secret of the proximity fuse became impossible by early January 1945. Too many shells had been expended, and too many soldiers had witnessed their unique effects. On January 6, the War Department authorized limited disclosure. The New York Times subsequently reported on a new type of artillery shell that dramatically multiplied the effectiveness of American guns, though the precise mechanism remained officially classified. The German intelligence apparatus finally grasped the devastating power of the new American ordnance, though critically late in the conflict. A stark January 10th report from Foreign Armies West confirmed the nightmare. The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This invisible technological edge, the report noted, had already inflicted severe casualties among our forces in the Ardennes, with no effective countermeasures available. Post-war strategic analysis cemented the proximity fuse's decisive impact on the battlefield. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, reflecting on the collapse of the German counteroffensive, lamented, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." This sentiment was echoed by General Osso Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, who testified that the American fire was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in the air, a weapon capable of causing panic even among hardened veteran troops. The numbers quantify this terror. Roughly 200,000 proximity-fused shells were ultimately expended, contributing to an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total German losses inflicted by artillery. The fuse achieved an extraordinary 5 to 10 times greater effectiveness than conventional ammunition, requiring no forward observation even in the worst weather. For the German soldier, often a conscripted teenager in the war's desperate final stages, this meant death delivered by a weapon that seemed to possess intelligence, finding them wherever they sought cover. Yet, the human cost was not confined to the front lines. Back in the United States, the intense pressure to manufacture these weapons of unprecedented technology exacted a severe toll on American production workers. Factory accidents were rigorously suppressed for security, while workers at key facilities like Crosley Corporation and Emerson Radio suffered breakdowns fueled by stress and profound exhaustion, paying their own silent price for Allied victory. The grim moral calculus of total war demanded such innovation. While the Battle of the Bulge ultimately claimed 19,000 American lives, historians must confront the staggering counterfactual. Without the decisive effectiveness of proximity fuses, the conflict would have been prolonged, escalating the casualty count and condemning countless more victims of the Holocaust awaiting the liberation that the shortening of the war afforded them. Beyond its immediate battlefield impact, the proximity fuse program generated a profound technological legacy that fundamentally reshaped the post-war world. The enforced requirement for durability and miniaturization yielded crucial breakthroughs. The tiny vacuum tubes became the essential foundations for modern electronics. The strict quality control procedures established for mass fuse production became formalized industry standards, and the complex organizational methods coordinating hundreds of disparate suppliers pioneered the very principles of modern supply chain management. This specialized expertise was directly transferable. Dr. James Van Allen, utilizing his knowledge of miniaturized components, later applied this skill set to satellite instrumentation, culminating in the monumental discovery of Earth's radiation belts. Militarily, the fuse established the concept of the autonomous sensor, the first weapon capable of sensing its environment and choosing the optimal moment to detonate. This revolutionary principle in radar and self-governing mechanisms became the direct ancestor of guided missiles, smart weapons, and every precision-guided munition deployed on contemporary battlefields. The Battle of the Bulge officially concluded on January 25, 1945, with German forces in decisive retreat. Hitler's final desperate offensive had cost the Axis approximately 100,000 casualties for zero strategic gain. American losses totaled 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had not merely been a successful weapon. It had proven itself, in the eyes of the High Command, as a decisive war winner. General Eisenhower's assessment that the strategic significance of the proximity fuse cannot be overstated. Had Germany successfully possessed this technology, the D-Day landings would have faced logistical and tactical hurdles so severe they might have rendered the entire operation impossible. This was not a mere refinement of existing artillery, but a revolutionary technological leap that fundamentally altered the calculus of modern combat. For the German soldiers caught in the crosshairs, the experience was profoundly unsettling. They faced an unprecedented form of death delivered by shells that seemed unerringly intelligent, transforming the very atmosphere into a lethal, inescapable killing zone. This sudden, ubiquitous threat signaled the irrevocable arrival of the technological age in warfare. The effectiveness of this innovation was decisively proven following Colonel Axelson's unauthorized deployment on December 16, 1944. Through the subsequent systematic use of over 200,000 proximity-fused shells across the frozen expanse of the Ardennes, the United States demonstrated that scientific superiority could translate directly into overwhelming military advantage. The Proximity Fuse Project represented a crucial convergence of American industrial capacity, scientific genius, and flexible tactical adaptation, yielding a weapon critical in determining the war's final outcome. The saga of the proximity fuse is ultimately a narrative of deep that industrial democracies could quickly mobilize to produce weapons of devastating effectiveness, that innovation would overcome numerical parity, and that the side possessing superior science would ultimately prevail. These lessons not only shaped the remainder of World War II, but dictated the entire structure of military affairs that followed. In the brutal winter landscape of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare was formally inaugurated, rewriting the mathematics of death with tiny radar sets and forever changing the human experience of combat.